Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann Rabke, and my husband, Carl Rabke. Embodiment Matters is an ongoing, rich conversation about what it really means to be embodied and why and how embodiment matters so much in our daily lives and in our modern world. You can find out more about our wonderful guests, about our work. You can sign up for our newsletter and find out how to become a supporting member of our podcast online at embodimentmatters.com.
In this episode, we had the great pleasure of speaking with our friend Bayo Akomolafe. And Bayo is an internationally recognized speaker, poet, philosopher, activist, writer, and teacher. He's written a couple books, including These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home. And Bayo is also the chief curator of the Emergence Network, and they do wonderful offerings. And I think Bayo is one of the most unique minds that I have ever come across. I can't recall a conversation with him or a talk or a piece that he's written that doesn't kind of pop open to some way of thinking that I never thought was possible. And he draws on so many different realms, from quoting James Hillman and psychotherapy to quantum physics to the comic books of his nerd youth that he talks about, and the deep understandings of the Yoruba and indigenous ways of knowing. And he is so gifted at looking at things freshly and in a way that really can pop open different possibilities. And in this conversation, we cover a wide range of topics. We look at some of the elements of the current global pandemic we're in. And as Bayo often says, these times are urgent. We must slow down, and what the slowing down of the pandemic has brought about. Also looking at other challenges like climate crisis and the racial uprisings and systematic injustices that are being seen more clearly in the U.S. and around the world. We also unpack some different concepts like what it means to be sanctuary and provide sanctuary, the notion of bewilderment, and what he calls the fugitive society. And anyway, there are whole realms that we travel to in this conversation, and we hope you enjoy it. Bayo is also going to be offering another round of an online gathering called We Will Dance with Mountains that will be happening in the fall. And you can find out more about Bayo and his writing and teachings at his website, bayoakomolafe.net. Okay, so welcome, Bayo. We're so grateful to be here with you today.
So glad to be here, brother and sister. I've been looking forward to this.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Before we get into, topics or a list of questions to ask you about, I just want to ask, we said this already before we hit record, but how are you doing? How's your family? How's being at home instead of world traveling?
Well, it's been the most grounding months of my life, actually. I would make bold to say that it has been, from traveling every week, literally across the Atlantic, sometimes twice a month, in perverse itineraries that took me away from home all the time, and wasn't without its consequences in terms of my relationship with my family. Mm-hmm. I feel this is in part a blessing. Mm-hmm. That might seem like a blind thing to say in view of the tragedies of this time, but nothing comes in this world that comes completely by itself. tragedy comes mixed with joy. Joy comes mixed and tinged with sorrow. I'm leaning into the joys of this moment, and that is the opportunity to be with my family, to wash dishes, to experience the extraordinary that is hidden in the folds and the crevices of the ordinary. And to, yeah, being at home has been humbling and rewarding in ways that I didn't quite expect.
Yeah. So Bayo, this powerful line that you shared of these times are urgent, we must slow down. And the ways that the pandemic has kind of brought the whole world to a slowing. I'm wondering if there are questions that you wish people were asking in this time of slowing down.
Well, I think people are already asking those very interesting questions. It's I speak with friends and colleagues and people that I work with, and those questions come in different shapes and sizes. Questions, mind you, that may never have been possible if this pandemic didn't happen. You guys know about the Hiroshima bombings, right? Of course, in 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 6th and August 9th. Was it Little Boy, Fat Man, the names of the bombs. The effect of that bomb was, hundreds of thousands of people died. But those that were left behind were still affected till this day by the nuclear explosion. They're called hibakusha. The hibakusha. And they're generally people who were maybe a few kilometers away from the blast, whose bodies were affected by the radioactive material, maybe people who were pregnant and their children were affected by it. So their bodies were affected in many ways, more ways than one, by that bomb blast. Where am I going with this? I feel that, just like the hibakusha, the hibakusha had the bomb blast, the Hiroshima explosion still exploding in your bodies in some senses. In cancerous outbursts, discrimination. In a sense, 1945 is still happening in 2020. In a sense, the virus exploded. We've just witnessed an explosion. And that explosion has, in a way that we may never recover from, it has changed us. It has changed our bodies. And this is the reason why I even speak about this, to dance to the side a bit. This is the reason why I speak about thought as being topographical, ecological. Thought is not a human property. Thought is, some thinking may not be possible until the human or the more than human world moves and does something different. The virus exploded, and our bodies have been changed. New thoughts, new questions are now available. The furniture in the room is upside down. Heads are on legs. The bodies are here and there. Everything is upside down. But it's only in the midst of this chaos that we can see ourselves as if for the first time. So I'm hearing questions, and this is to bring us back home. I went all the way around there. People are asking questions about work, for instance, like, why did we frame work in such a way that required us to traverse distances to arrive at office spaces and cubicles? If we could have, if we were capable of conducting work in the ways we're doing it right now, at home, and all that, why did we conduct schooling in the ways that we've conducted it? Especially in India, everyone is all about homeschooling now, which makes EJ and I feel like part of the elite, because we've been on this journey for a long time. We never knew anything like this was going to show up, but there it is. It just came out of the blues, and everyone is speaking about schooling. Harvard University is closing down. See, all these questions are now, we're not capable of asking them. We're not capable of seeing that which was once invisible. So I wouldn't say that I want people to ask particular questions right now. I would say that the normal is fluid. You know, the resilient normal is at its most fragile state at this point in time, at this point in history. And maybe there's an opportunity there to go into the places that these questions are already leading us into, and to stay there, to work with the shadows there, to ask new questions from the questions that are instigating us to be doubtful about or to be suspicious of the normal. Yeah.
I love at the beginning of, I'm not going to get the exact title, but your long and profoundly
tedious
essay. No.
Tedious essay.
Not tedious. About coronavirus, there's in the beginning, the introduction, you say, may our normal never be the same again. May our roads be rough and the disturbances are sanctuaries. Will you unpack that a little bit?
There's a proverb from Yoruba land. And for those who don't know Yoruba people are from a fictional country called Nigeria, which is east of Wakanda. I'm just kidding. Nigeria is a nation state, but in many senses, the non-fictional is already fictional. But I digress. The Yoruba people from Nigeria have a proverb, and it goes like this. In order to find your way, you must become lost. Why do they say that? Why do they insist on lostness? They understand at some guttural level that things tend to get sticky, that in a world that is entangled and entangling, bodies will reiterate, reinforce, and repeat familiar patterns that may be problematic. And that in those times when that happens, especially in those times when we think we're doing innovative things, in the name of solutions, when actually we're in fact just repeating the world as we know it to be. In those moments, the thing to do is to get lost, is to lose our ways, is to stray away from the algorithms that have conditioned and instigated the patterns that we're used to and that we're exhausted with. So this idea of inviting the normal or inviting disturbance there's a prayer that comes with that. It says, may your road be rough, like you said. May your road be rough. And the idea is, may tricksters disturb you. May the topographical shifts that are afoot, may they leave you unsettled. Because it's only when you're settled that you repeat the familiar. When you're unsettled, you see yourself and the irony of continuity as if for the first time. So the invitation of the trickster is to break open your eyes, is to help you see your scene, is to help you encounter monsters. And the agency of the monster, for instance, is to protest your claims to exclusivity, right? The monster is there. The monster has always been a very powerful archetype in the ways modern citizens understand themselves, understand character, integrity, purpose, all of that. The monster is the thing we push away. We pathologize, we exteriorize, we otherize, we make strange in order to keep the order of the sane, the cult of innocence, which is what James Hillman called white supremacy. In order to keep our feet in a place of stability, we push the uncertain, to the edges. The trickster's work is to unbinarize the equation, to bring the monster close so that you're disturbed enough to become something different. And I feel this is at the heart of everything I speak about and write about, that we are in a colonial order. And this colonial order is what we summarily call the human or the self. The fetish of modernity is to pamper and to coddle the self, the human. The human is not just a human figure. The human is a large terrain, a territory of excavation, of destruction, of extermination, of displacement. That's the human. And right now, I feel the world is mounting an insurgency. And what that insurgency is doing is bringing us close to the wilds we thought we had exteriorized in a final and absolute way. So people are going to be feeling feelings that they never felt before. People are going to be probably dreaming dreams that they never had before. It's like data is all over the place, like nuclear material, like radioactive stuff. This shift is upending our claims to stability. So disturbance is a prayer. It's a call for the crossroads to disturb the highway. And it's an invitation for us to become something different.
Yeah, beautiful. I was reading an interview you did recently that was, looking at the climate crisis and COVID and the movement to get back in control. And your
with DW.
Yeah, and
right.
Quote of what if control is the crisis, and it seems so connected to that of this wildness reemerging and the trying to control something being the crisis that we're facing.
I think there's nothing exactly novel about saying that control is, I think many people, since 2000, Paul Crutzen and Cole have named the Anthropocene, given it its name. And at the heart of the Anthropocene is the problematic presence, the presence or the embodiment of human centrality, that we have created these environments and we have recreated the world. We're on an earth-shaping project that is about reconstructing the world so that it dances to the ego of to the sliver of consciousness that we call the ego. It's like psychic gentrification. It's like right. So it's like taking going to the marshlands, the backwater places, and all of that, and just pouring concrete into it so that we can reclaim a sense of stability, like I said earlier. And that control is a strategy for longevity. And I think there's something deeply, I don't want to say innocent, but there's something deeply traumatic and sorrowful about that. I don't want to cast it in the binarizing light, like good versus evil. I feel that somewhere along the line, if I could speak in those terms, control became an imperative. Maybe it was sparked by a mother faced with an impossible choice. Do I run away from this tornado, or do I face the tornado? But I can't lose my loved one, so I'm going to run away from the tornado. And I'm not just going to run away from the tornado and seek a hiding place. I'm going to create technologies that will probably render me immune to these unstable patterns. I'm going to construct ideologies and call them laws of nature. And these laws of nature are supposedly going to help me predetermine what the world is going to be like. It's going to help me predict and control the world. And from that, modernity, settlement, sedentary communities, transatlantic slave trade. I'm not trying to create a genealogy that is simple and neat, but I'm trying to say that that control didn't just sprout ahistorically, in the world. It has its genesis. It has its not genesis. I would say it has its entangling assemblage of other bodies that make it possible. The risk with control is that the more we stress control, the more we're blind to our own entangled embodiment with the world. And I feel that the virus came from that condition, from thinking we're lords of the realm, and that because we're lords of the realm, we can encroach on lands that are, modernity is a flattening of the sacred, right? It just says everything is permissible. And in doing that, in flattening everything, we rendered ourselves fragile and open to the elements. So I think control is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would love to ask, I resonate so much with just what you're speaking about and sort of the resistance to, telling a neat and simple story about what's happening and questioning this human centrality, I think is so important. And I'm curious, how does that look for you, like in your life, in living, in sort of personally shifting from human centrality, being raised with that kind of philosophy to, like, how do you shift that? I guess I want to say, I just love the conversation about it. And I'm really interested in, like, how do we ground this shift in daily life, being in the middle, already entangled in modernity and concrete poured all over the world and all of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to approach that question in two ways. In one sense, I want to highlight, and maybe this is the first and most important for me, I want to emphasize the impossibility of the question. That it's, in a sense, it is it's impossible to respond to that question. That acknowledging that we are in the middle, that we are not at the driver's wheel, we're not the source of change in the universe, means that we cannot. The question about how do we ground it, what do we do about this crisis? There's a hidden codicil there. The premise is, if we get our act together, maybe we can do something about the situation. But everything I talk about is noticing that we are not the drivers of change, and we are not the arrowhead of decolonization. Even, I mean, it took a virus. It took the agency of a virus, this infinitesimally small being, which is not small at all in its effects. It took a virus for carbon emissions to dip. I mean, think about the sum total of all activism since 1970s, since we've been performing on the streets, speaking, the lectures, the panels, the papers, the books, the documentaries, the movies, all of that did not seem to crack the power of the virus in shutting everything down. Nothing else could have done that. Mm-hmm. Not even the United Nations, not the most powerful person on earth, I don't know who that is, could have said everyone into your homes, no flights, nothing of the sort. It took a virus, something we haven't seen and may not be able to see except through a microscope, to be able to do that. So in a sense, this is not our question to ask in one sense. But in another sense, it's okay to ask the question.
I really want to.
It's okay in a different sense. In a different sense, holding the tensions that come with being citizens of a cosmic order that is emerging and always emerging. Asking the question is a useful entry point into the considerations that are that might feature in my work as post-activism or decolonization of fugitivity, fugitive incapacitation, unlearning mastery. Let me not answer in abstract terms, bring it down to earth a bit. The way my family, for instance, learned to approach this moment, and I should say EJ and I, my wife and I, is we we decided we wanted to leave the university. We suspected that the university, the ivory tower complex, was producing citizens who were cut off, dissociated from their world. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to do something different with our children if we got to have children. Thank goodness we did. We have two beautiful children. Mm-hmm. And our first idea was to move away from the schooling paradigm, not to pathologize schooling or to even think of schooling as a monolith, but to enter into an exploration that is premised on the idea that our child yet to come would be an elder, would be a co-researcher in the Anthropocene, a co-philosopher, not just a blank recipient of adultism and all the wisdoms of society. We would treat the child as an awkward shift in space-time continuum, something interesting that you would want to lean close into and study with, not something you want to stuff with what you already know. Mm-hmm. And this was our first activism, if you will. Our first activism wasn't to find a solution. We didn't even know how to frame the problem entirely. But we wanted to branch away from the highway that reproduces the familiar, mm-hmm. and does that prominently with our children by outsourcing them to institutions and the nation state, ultimately. So this is the way we're still doing our work, and grounding ourselves, following our children, learning from their questions, learning together with them, teaching them and being taught by them, mm-hmm. And what did my wife call it? Transparenting. That is, parenting is not a linear one-way street. It's two-way. So mm-hmm. that's one way we're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That's great.
Yeah. Bayo, you wrote a piece on the 1st of January of this year that actually it seems quite prophetic around the decade of the fugitive. And I wanted to read just a little passage of that and then ask if you could talk a little bit more to this decade of the fugitive. So at the end it says,
right.
May this decade bring more than just solutions, more than just a future. May it bring words we don't know yet and temporalities we have not yet inhabited. May we be slower than speed could calculate and swifter than the pull of gravity of words can incarcerate. And may we be visited so thoroughly and met in wild places so overwhelmingly that we are left undone, ready for composting, ready for the impossible. Welcome to the decade of the fugitive.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Ready for composting really strikes me, huh? Here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, here we are in the in at the borderlands of the human. And I think what crossed I think we all felt it in a way, and people have written me about that text. And that what did I feel before writing that? And I think I felt what they felt. They felt what I felt. Mm-hmm. In a sense, we are feeling similar things. That 2020 seemed like a huge deal, like something huge is about to happen, and I felt it there. I wasn't quite. It was inchoate. It was unformed, amniotic. But I felt this feels like the time when the human order, the colonial order that props up on a pedestal the human figure. This feels like a time that this exhausting form begins to fall apart. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say begins, like it's just beginning. But maybe we all get to see it. We all get to recognize it more and more, that this is not sustainable. This is not useful. This is not helpful. This isn't beautiful, in a sense. And so I wrote about fugitivity. I'm writing more and more about fugitivity, to recall the cultural aesthetics and dynamics of the New World slaves and their quests for marronage and freedom, and I'm borrowing from that, the idea of the fugitive, that the plantation produces certain kinds of gods and certain kinds of agency and behavior, which is not too dissimilar, from modernity writ large. And the fugitive's work wasn't to resist, just face up to the power, because in many senses, the fugitive was overwhelmed. The slave was overwhelmed already by this dominant power. There was nothing, little or nothing, the slave could do if it were to go toe to toe with the imperial realm that was the condition of his incarceration. Mm-hmm. But there was something else the fugitive could do, or the fugitive to be could do, and that was to disturb power's claim to exclusive power. Mm-hmm. Fred Moulton, who writes a lot about fugitivity and whom I'm learning from, says, one does not speak truth to power, which seems like a very, very controversial thing to say when everyone is being invited to speak their truth to power, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. Everyone is being invited to speak up. Let your voices be heard. Don't let the powers overwhelm you. It's a politics of recognition, of visibility, of identity, of speaking up and showing one's face. Mm-hmm. But Fred Moulton understands differently, and I think he also borrows from this bacchanal aesthetic of the antebellum South and that slave era. He understands that that if you go toe to toe with power, if you play that game, if you articulate your emancipation within the ontology of your oppression, you risk reinforcing your imprisonment. Mm-hmm. If you struggle, you might win. You risk failure, but you also risk victory. Because victory will pull you in, and victory will blind you. It will reshape you, and you might find yourself looking more and more like the thing you were up against. Right? Mm-hmm. The French Revolution invaded the Bastille and killed the royals, drove them out of the palaces, but it left the throne intact. Mm-hmm. And that throne made way for Napoleon Bonaparte. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the world spills away from that binary. This is where the trickster's agency is really useful at this time of liquidity. The trickster invites us to see that victory versus failure, the world is much more complex than that. That you might think failure is all, is this absolute realm of negativity, but there are treasures there. And that's what the fugitive understood. That's what Harriet Tubman, understood. Mm-hmm. That maybe our resistance should be framed not in terms of defeating them, but by escaping. I wouldn't even call it escape, but mm-hmm. by exiling ourselves from this entire plantation, by sneaking through the wounds of imperial power, and then creating together a different world, a different order, a different way of relating to each other. Not from the start, you don't create something from the beginning, but creating from the middle. That's where we all start from. Mm-hmm. Taking our griefs, our half visions, our half tongues and languages, our intuitions, our dreams, and all of that, taking all of that and working with it, experimenting with it in a different way, refusing to be seen. I told someone different recently that the Chinese have this, there are claims that there are 3 apocryphal Chinese curses from ancient times. And they increase in intensity as you go deeper into them. The first one is, may you live in interesting times. Have you guys heard this before?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And the second one is, may you be seen by the emperor. And the third one is, may you get that position in the imperial palace that you've been wanting. And the idea here is visibility is a trap. Visibility is a trap. That if you strive to be seen, seen is corporeal. It's not just ethereal. It's not just ideational. To be seen is to be shaped in that moment and to be reshaped. Visibility is a realm of politicking that we risk. That risks. What's at stake there is we lose ourselves. We become like the Christians of old. We become part of the empire. We take on the garbs of the oppressor in order to reinforce our freedom, our so-called freedom. So fugitivity is the invitation to leave. What does leaving look like? Well, I'm still exploring that. I have ideas. I'm not the only voice in this choir. But yes, I think this is the time of fugitivity. Fugitivity is the call to exile ourselves from the order that reproduces the familiar.
You know, something I've heard you talk and teach about a lot is sanctuary. I wonder if you would speak to that and how that relates to fugitivity and making sanctuary, becoming sanctuary.
I mean, we don't have. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, we don't have sanctuaries in the ways that in the medieval sense of the word, sanctuary being this place, this sacred place where someone who was accused, the accused could run to and find rest, and the Christians borrowed it from pagan sources, and they instituted it for hundreds of years. I think it ended in the middle of the 17th century, 1623. And the idea was, if you were accused maybe of killing someone, you could claim sanctuary. You could claim it because it was already there, right? You rush to a church, hold a part of the pillar, or more popularly, the hagode or the door knocker. And once you hold it and claim sanctuary, you're granted access into the sanctuary. No one could harm you in that place. No one could drag you out. Of course, there were incidences where that happened, but they were rare. And in that place of sanctuary, even if it's in the midst of your accusers, you're somewhat in a different planet, in a different space-time zone, right? It was like a queering of flatness. The world wasn't flat with sanctuaries. There was this bump in the flatness of things that allowed someone to be at a remove from their accusers, from the conditions that brought them there. But with the rise of the juridical frameworks that we understand now to be popular, sanctuary was lost in that sense. I feel this is a time to remake sanctuary, or as an ongoing project of queering the flatness of modernity. And what does that mean? I mean that that we need to find ways in collective wisdoms of composting the human, composting ourselves. And what does that mean further? It means paying attention, or as I like to respell it, art, then a hyphen, tension, giving art tension to the things that are pathologized or exteriorized beyond the human. For instance, modernity, the city is in many senses the architectural strategy of removing, exorcising grief and sorrow. And the city, the way it's built, the permanent structure, the longing for permanence. Grief is the wilting of bodies, right? It's the gravitational pull to bodies to fall to the earth and to allow the earth to meet it in the middle, something of that sort. I don't see grief as a human affect. I see it as like everything else, I see it as a cartographical project. I see it as how the earth or how the universe touches itself. I see it as how flowers open up in the morning. I see it as how leaves fall to the ground in the right season. I see grief as bodies tumbled into other bodies. But you see, that's a problem for modernity. It needs to categorize, to index, to name things in a final way. And so it cannot afford bodies being tumbled into bodies. And so it builds structures, ideologies, philosophies, thought patterns, ways of working, ways of schooling that centralize identity, centralize the self as immune to these effects. What I feel composts the human is to make way for grief. It's modest, it's in part, but everything is in part. Just allowing oneself to, and by grief, I don't mean crime, merely crime. Mm-hmm. I mean the vocational project of touching loss in its vibrancy. You know, there's hardly room in our business-like approach to life, in our repudiation of death as a rightful citizen, you know, in this realm of being. There in the business of life, it seems that there is this desire to just run away from it all, to shut down and not feel, like Baldur, the Norse god, not feel anything. I'm trained as a psychologist, and my work, to put it mildly, was to train people to get back to work, to be productive again, to be sane, to rejoin the realm of the sane. But I feel there's an invitation to touch loss, to explore loss as a research project. And I don't mean a research project in terms of a paper that you submit to a university. I mean a collective inquiry that allows us to meet the world in its emerging, you know, in its dying, to fall in love with this. You know, it's something that James Hillman called Homo aestheticus, you know, that maybe we're here to appreciate the world, you know, and just to fall in love with it in ways that sustainability as a response to climate change may not capture. There needs to be room for us to fall apart, for us to cry together, yes, but for us to talk about the loss of dolphins or the loss of ancestors, to decorate these wounds, you know, as a cultural aesthetic, and then see how that changes us. That's just one example in a constellation of examples that might help us understand what sanctuary is designed to do.
I love the language of decorating these wounds together.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know you I don't remember when, but had a project pre-pandemic in the favelas in Rio, right, in Brazil. Will you talk a little bit about that, and also just like what possibilities you're dreaming into now, ways of, you know, enacting what you're talking about?
Right. So this plays with the with what we've shared so far. Sorry, I've dominated the conversation.
Oh, we want to. You're invited to.
There's a whole lot to share, I guess. I went to Brazil, and I heard stories of cracks in the ground. Not metaphorical cracks, but literal cracks in the ground. Openings, if you will. There's this story in Rio in 2011, as they were preparing for, was it 2011? I can't remember. When they were preparing to host the Olympics. Is either the Olympics or the World Cup, one of the two. I'm not a very sporty person.
We're not either.
You guys already know. One of the bulldozers, you know, was working at the port in Rio de Janeiro. It was a company, and they were breaking open the concrete and stuff like that. And something happened. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. It was a mistake or something. And they opened up a crack, you know, and widened a crack in the ground. And they happened upon a site of death, of a burial ground. I mean, that was just beneath the overground of modern flatness, of so-called claims of a post-racial society, of having ascended, of having achieved. It was just a few layers away. Modernity is just a few layers away from the monsters it pretends to have resolved. And as they opened up this ground, the crack widened. They saw bones of slaves, about 100,000, I think, in
Wow.
the estimation of people, of texts that I've read, 100,000 people that were in that slave port. It was the largest slave port in the world. So these people that were buried there were most likely the slaves that were not sold and taken into the heart of Brazil, into the plantations. They probably died upon disembarking from the ship. And they just stayed there. And because there was no room for them in the project of modernity, they squeezed their bones into this tight place. They stuffed them into a place where, in the same place, that was a refuse dump for broken glass jars and trinkets and stuff. And they found their bones mingling with these things. And they also found prayer beads, trinkets, items that the slaves brought with them. It's as if their bones were still praying, right? And they opened up this ground, and I went to a lady who bought a house. She's a white Brazilian lady, and she's converted her home to a museum right now. But she was doing some renovation, and she bought that house, and the ground opened up, and here's this lady in there. Of course, they determined that this is a young woman in her 20s or 30s, I think. And they gave her the name Bakita, named after a Sudanese, slave who actually left slavery and became a saint in the Catholic order. And they named her Bakita. And she told me stories about Bakita that I cannot repeat, or she told me not to share with others. But it made, I hope it suffices our listeners to know that it made my hair stand on end to hear those stories. And what she shared with me later on is, I think, the message of the favela is the message of failure, is the message of fugitivity, is the message of falling to the ground. And she said, I feel everywhere across the world there are openings. Cracks are emerging everywhere. And we need to go on the ground. We need to go into those cracks and stay there with the trouble of it. And right there in that museum, which also doubles as a home, the bones of Bakita are perpetually exposed, just a few centimeters above the soil. You could see her white fleshed bone, if you will, just speaking in calling, to those who gaze at her from the surface, as if saying, come here and let me remake you. I feel we modernity, or white modernity, is suffering the wound dehiscences. The wounds are opening up again, and the work of modernity is to put a Band-Aid on that. Is to reflatten everything, right? Is to say, go back to work, everything's fine. Don't ask questions about what's beneath the surface. Don't ask questions about what lies behind the logos. Don't ask questions about where your phones come from. Just enjoy these luxuries we're pushing to you, and get on the line for Black Friday while you're at it. It's like the surface is losing its integrity. White normativity is becoming exhausted. And there is this more than human invitation to fall beneath the order, the overground of human reproduction. the reproducing of the imperial order to do some work beneath. And I know that is the case because I went to those favelas and I noticed people who are working with each other and reconstituting themselves in a way that does not depend on a politics of recognition or visibility. They're picking up so-called trash and reconstituting it as soap, as food and stuff. And you might say that's a horrible thing. And I don't mean to romanticize the conditions there, but I mean to say that failure is more abundant, than the ways that toxic success and the normativity of success has taught us to think about it. That there is a lot more, there's a lot more to play with than we know about. I saw people learning about how to change orange peels into detergent. They were developing skills among themselves and sharing it in some kind of fugitive way that has nothing to do with putting a logo on a piece of paper and staking your claims and speaking truth to City Hall and power. They were doing things that defies and abuses the realms of reason. And Marcus Aurelius said it, the man who escapes reason is the fugitive. And I think reason is getting dry. It's getting tired. Like James Hillman said, reason has never been king of consciousness. It's actually a janitor. It's not king. It's not king at all. Its job description is really tiny. It's not as vaunted and as bloated as we think it to be. It's overdone. And so the non-gentrifiable spaces are staking their claims. They're making their presences known. And I think we need to play with them, play with Bakita, see what happens.
Wow.
Yeah. I love the way, Bayo, that you can take words that are so commonplace and expose the sort of binaries and stretch them a little bit. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the word justice and, seeing the wounds that are opening up in the US around race right now and racial justice and around the world too. I'd just love to have your perspective on that word and in the situation of, the US's cultural wounds that are being exposed and overall just the wounds of modernity. Where does justice play in that?
I mean, the way we speak about justice is it seems like the one word that no one should say a bad thing about, right? It's the most righteous word. It's the very condition of righteousness. Martin Luther King used it so poetically and beautifully in his speech, I Have a Dream. It has featured in our stories. It has an almost archetypal presence. And so we long for justice. The thing is, and here's the thing, in a world that is where bodies are, and by bodies, I don't mean just fleshly, human, organic bodies. I mean thought bodies, affect bodies, tree bodies, stone bodies. In a world where relationship, or in a world that is processual and relational, bodies are not discrete things, cut off definitely from everything else. Erin and Carl are processual becomings, and to abstract you from your household, from Utah, from the nation state of America, from your longings and passions, from your own ancestry, to abstract you from all of that and to think of you as, that noble word, individuated. To abstract you from there is to to be blind to the performance that is you, to the ongoingness that is you. So everything comes with other bodies attached, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And justice as well. That there is no such thing called justice in an ideational, Platonic sense. Justice as an infinite ideal that is universally appropriate wherever it might show its face. The question here is, how are we framing justice? How have topographical matterings and cultural conditionings shaped the body of justice? Modernity shapes justice as resolution, as closure. The type of closure it performs is punitive, retributive justice. It's cancel culture. It's you said something wrong, therefore you're canceled. Okay, that's cancel culture. It's basically atomistic, reductionistic. That is the way it sees things. Is if I can get rid of the problematic element, then I can restore the order of the good. If I can get rid of evil, then I've enlarged the territory of good. What it doesn't understand is that so-called good and so-called evil are transcorporeally entangled in a way that escapes our vision, our regimes of seeing. They're exchanging molecules all the time. And if we looked closer, we'll find that we're always complicit in the environments that we supposedly want to leave behind. So justice seems like what Michel Foucault spoke about, this a way of disciplining bodies, a way of arriving at closure. And what it can offer us is very conservative. It returns us, it's like blame, right? Blame is an affect of conservation. It brings us back to the moral universe that we're used to. It wants to restore. It wants to restore what has been there before. The problem then is, or let me put it in very poetic terms then, that justice may give you a seat at the table, but it will never allow you out of the house. It will never allow you to go play outside. It will stand at the door and say, back to the table. It will give you a seat at the table. It will not allow you to play outside. And now that the house itself is problematic, now that the house is on fire, we need to leave the house. So this is why I say justice can often get in the way of transformation. Because justice, the very idea of justice, is institutionalized by aspects of our society that are problematic in themselves. The modern nation state, the nuclear family, the church, the capitalist order, agro-allied industry, the industrial complex, the military. All of these are the webs, that come together to create the matrix that we call justice. And these are problematic. They can only give us what's been there before. And there's no leaving it behind. What we need is a wormhole, right? Racial justice, for instance, racial justice can only grant you the trappings of modernity. And the trappings of modernity are ironically the dissociated self, the self that has been cut off from belonging. It's not going to restore you. It's not going to address the past. It's not going to, modernity has nothing to say to Bakita, is what I'm trying to say. It has nothing to say to the underground population, the teeming masses of people that are saying, what about us? And those are not even trying to be included in our realm. But their voices are being heard in a sense. We're beginning to hear the echoes of their activity, beneath the ground. And justice has nothing to say to that. So maybe racial justice, and I never speak about these things as if they were pure, revelatory, divine, things that popped into my head or popped into anyone's head and are free from tension and contradiction and paradox. I never speak about it. To speak itself is to render some kind of violence to the world, right? So I'm already participating in that. But I want to say that noticing and treasuring the precious activity of people in framing resistance as a place of power, that's beautiful. People need to eat. People need to strive for equality. People need to pay their bills. People need to go shopping once in a while. I'm not a escape artist, so I wouldn't say that that's not happening today. So people need to do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
The trouble, the risk is that if we don't find a place, if we don't address the ironies of continuity, we will sooner or later be stuck in this prison.
Mm-hmm.
And this prison can only produce dead Black bodies. This prison can only proliferate pain and suffering and dissociation and so-called mastery. What we need to do is to fall to earth. And that's not justice. That's not the work of racial justice. That's not the work of racial justice at all. Mm-hmm. That's the work of transraciality, is what I call it. That's the work of fugitive compostings. That's the work of saying, I don't know what our bodies are becoming, but there's this space of excess. Blackness not as a site of struggle, but Blackness as a site of excess, the embarrassing excessiveness of things, the invitation to fall down to earth, the invitation to play with our bodies in different ways, to play with grief, to play with failure, and see what becomes of that. It's practical politics. It's not airy-fairy stuff. And I think we can do this.
I could just listen to you talk for days, Bayo. What a beautiful ride. I want to ask you about the human tendency to want to have an answer or find closure or be able to tell a neat story, as opposed to your way of thinking, which is always like on the edges. And I know you've spoken about the word bewilderment, and I wonder if you personally relish bewilderment.
Oh, I do. I do. Because I am also. So go ahead, sister. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, a lot of what you share it's so intriguing, like it's so juicy to me, and it's not easy. It's not like the what do I want to say? The intuitive move for most people to make, to go in that direction. Yeah. We want to clamp down. We want to hold on to the banks and not let go.
Yeah.
I'm just curious personally, to hear about your love of bewilderment and paradox and how you rest, or maybe not rest, but find joy or something. What is it for you to I remember asking you this last time we talked together, like, how do you learn to think this way? And now I guess I just want to know about your love of bewilderment.
Right. I don't know. I don't know how to. I could create some fabulation, some stories for you, brother, sister. I could tell you that when I was young, I said I wanted to go to the moon, which is for real, by the way. And there's always this love of exploration, and then I became a nerd, and nerdship comes with a particular territory. It frees one up from the imperatives of socializing, and you wonder a lot about stars and things and ants and stuff that some people don't. But that I don't think would be enough. I think I don't know how to tell the story of myself, because I don't know what myself is, right? It's not an essential thing that comes with ingredients or label that I can just mouth off to you. I just know that I remember writing as an undergrad that I feel possessed. Like I feel possessed, like I remember writing that I feel like I was born with a question mark in my belly. And the question, every time I feed, the question mark grows, not me, because I was really scrawny and skinny. The question mark grows, and I feel suffocated. I feel like I'm suffocated, like there's a tapeworm that is just gaining mass in my guts. And that's the way I describe it to myself in a journal that I wrote to a Palestinian rabbi, a fictional character that I called Josephus. That's what nerds do. An imaginary friend of mine as an undergrad that I wrote to and I shared my problems with, and I spoke about my dreams for going to the edges and stuff like that. So in many senses, the way I'll respond to this question is, it's Flavius Josephus, it's nerdship, it's the unspeakable, insatiable desire for wildness and the promiscuousness of a universe that cannot be stabilized in any final way. But it's also things that I cannot speak about, not because I don't want to, but because it's impossible. It's not available for language. And I would also respect this moment that the very asking of it is part of the materiality of my longing for edges and bewilderment. It's also a lot of learning and hard-won victories, struggling to extricate myself, and I haven't quite completed that task, extricating myself from my Christian upbringing, which influenced my early views of the world as a black and white thing. And no one leaves your childhood behind in a final way. So I'm still entangled with those worlds. I'm full of contradictions. What can I do? But yes, that is my dance with bewilderment is, I hope, my hope is that it's useful for the choir, this choir of voices, of non-human and human voices, that comprises of you two, your beautiful son, that amazing snake in your house, and your hospitality, your friendship, and all of us that are in this huge thing together. We're all in this together. It's actually not my bewilderment. It's the bewilderment of the land, and how it whips its tentacles sometimes. Because I have to also say that I also long for certitude many times. I also want to put things in a box. So I'm not I don't do enlightenment. I don't do guruship. I'm heavily flawed, and I'm happy about it. That's all I'll say, I guess.
Well, hopefully some of the question marks in the bellies of the listeners have been fed and grown through this conversation. Before we close, I would love to just ask about upcoming offerings or things that you have going.
Oh, yes. Yes. So I would throw aside all the courtesies and the ethics of talking of being interviewed, and directly interview you guys first to join the next iteration of We Will Dance with Mountains.
Oh, hooray!
Let Us Make Sanctuary, that will begin in October.
Great.
And it's a research project into actually substantiating what it means to build sanctuary. And we'll be doing it together as research participants. And I'll be announcing pretty soon, before the end of July. And there's a team emerging around that, and I'm really excited about that. So if anyone wants to be part of that, well, the thing is, not everyone is invited.
Who is invited?
Well, if you feel a sense of, if you're complete and you know exactly what to do in these fluid times, then you don't need to come. Sanctuaries for those who are on the run, right? So if you're whole, you're good, you're ascended, and I don't mean this. I don't mean to be. I don't need to disparage or dismiss people who might feel that way. If you've arrived, then there's no need to leave your comfortable circumstances and come to a place of exile. Mm-hmm. But if you run your fingers over your skin and you feel cracks and openings, if you feel bewilderment, and you're ready to dwell at the accretion disk of a black hole, that is possibly the portal to another universe, then you're invited. Then you're invited, and I'm looking forward to it. It's such an exciting time, and that is, it's all under the stable of the Emergence Network, and the Emergence Network is doing wonderful things. A community is coming together, community of fugitives, a fugitive network is coming together, creating research projects that are exploring how to dwell in the underground, since the overground doesn't seem to be working for us anymore. Mm-hmm. So you can check out bayoakomolafe.net, emergencenetwork.org. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wonderful. I'm so thrilled to know you're doing the class again.
Yes.
I so enjoyed it. It was, like, I don't say it facetiously at all, but life-changing to be in that with you last time. And
yes, sister, yes.
I feel delighted and healthy trepidation about doing it again.
Good. That's the...
Oh, it's so good to talk with you. Thank you so much for making it.
Thank you so much, too.
Yes, and we hope we get to have you out in Utah when travel happens again, if that happens again someday.
If it happens again, I would love to see you guys again.
Wonderful.
And be with you all. Yeah. Thank you so much for your hospitality and the work you're doing.
You too.
Embodiment matters. Yes, it does.
Yes, and love to you and the family.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Bayo. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.